What if the Axis powers, triumphant in Europe, had turned their sights on South America? Imagine Nazi flags raised over Rio de Janeiro, German troops patrolling Buenos Aires, and Italian forces controlling Chilean ports. South America, long untouched by the global war that scarred Europe and Asia, suddenly becomes a battlefield. Entire countries are destabilized, governments fall, and daily life transforms in ways history never allowed. This is a world both terrifyingly real and chillingly plausible, a world where the consequences of World War II reach across the Atlantic. If you watch until the end, you'll discover how this alternate history reshapes global politics, culture, and society itself. The divergence occurs in 1941. In real history, Germany's advance in the Soviet Union stalled, Britain remained a thorn in the Axis side, and the United States eventually entered the war after Pearl Harbor. In this timeline, however, Germany achieves a decisive victory in the east. Moscow falls, the Soviet army collapses, and the Eastern Front is secured. Britain, isolated and unable to resist effectively, is forced into negotiations. Italy dominates the Mediterranean, while the United States, distracted and hesitant, delays full mobilization. With Europe under Axis control, Hitler and Mussolini seek new territories. South America, rich in resources like Venezuelan oil, Brazilian rubber, and Argentinian industry, becomes a strategic target. Covert operations destabilize governments, spreading propaganda, sabotage, and political unrest. By 1943, the Axis powers are prepared for an invasion. Brazil, Argentina, and neighboring countries face impossible choices: resist and risk destruction, or collaborate to survive. The first landings of Axis forces in northeastern Brazil mark the beginning of a series of political and military upheavals that will ripple across the continent. The question becomes, who will fall first and who will rise to resist? Brazil is the first nation to face full-scale invasion. Initially neutral, the country is unprepared for paratrooper assaults on Belém and naval bombardments along the coast. Argentina, divided between fascist sympathizers and democratic loyalists, faces internal conflict that weakens its ability to respond. Puppet regimes are installed in major cities, while local leaders are forced to navigate survival under occupation. Military engagements are intense. The dense Amazon jungle, rivers, and mountains slow the Axis advance, but German air power and mechanized units inflict massive casualties. São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro fall, yet guerrilla fighters in the interior launch ambushes that keep resistance alive. Across the continent, political structures crumble under the sudden shock of occupation. Local populations respond in unexpected ways. In some regions, collaboration occurs out of necessity. In others, resistance networks begin to form. The Axis soon realizes that controlling South America is more complex than controlling Europe. Terrain, distance, and the diverse population make permanent occupation a logistical nightmare. Still, the initial victories give them momentum, and the stage is set for a prolonged struggle. As Axis forces consolidate control, the United States is forced to respond. Distracted by the Pacific Theater, Washington initially hesitates, but mounting reports of Axis advances in South America provoke a full-scale hemispheric response. Troops are sent, alliances are called upon, and economic sanctions are intensified. Yet these efforts are largely too late to prevent occupation of major cities and industrial centers. Venezuela's oil fields, critical to the Allied war effort, are now under German control. Chile and Peru struggle to maintain neutrality, while Argentina becomes a hotspot for propaganda campaigns and covert resistance. Supply lines falter, economies collapse, and famine threatens urban populations dependent on imports. The region is gripped by fear, uncertainty, and mounting tension. The Axis spreads propaganda, portraying occupiers as liberators who bring stability and modernity. In reality, repression is widespread. Forced labor, mass arrests, and executions are routine. The occupation sparks underground movements as civilians risk their lives to share news, coordinate attacks, and maintain morale. Small victories by resistance fighters provide hope, but the balance of power remains uncertain. If you want to see how South America fights back and how the Axis occupation sparks a global crisis, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this timeline. By 1945, the Axis has consolidated control over major regions. Cities are garrisoned with German troops, Italian engineers build infrastructure to extract resources, and political structures are realigned to serve occupiers. Education systems are transformed into tools of indoctrination, teaching children to obey the state. Propaganda floods the media, glorifying the Axis and demonizing resistance. But South Americans do not surrender quietly. Resistance movements emerge across the continent. In Brazil, fighters in the Amazon conduct ambushes on Axis supply lines, disrupting communication and transport. In Argentina, underground networks sabotage railways and factories. Colombia, with its rugged mountains, becomes a base for guerrilla operations that continually frustrate Axis commanders. Coordination among these disparate groups is initially limited. Yet, as victories accumulate and communications improve, a sense of unity emerges. Resistance is no longer isolated, it begins to pose a significant threat to Axis control. Civilians secretly share information, resources, and intelligence. Ordinary people become warriors, logisticians, and messengers. The Axis faces its first real challenge, controlling a population unwilling to accept occupation. Axis control of South America reverberates globally. German access to Venezuelan oil and Brazilian rubber strengthens the Axis war machine, enabling more sustained campaigns in Europe and North Africa. Italian control over strategic ports facilitates resupply and troop movement. Meanwhile, the United States must divert forces to defend the Western Hemisphere, delaying operations in Europe and the Pacific. Allied nations face an altered reality. Britain, struggling to maintain supply lines and colonies, sees its influence wane. Neutral nations reassess alliances, and Latin American countries either capitulate or join resistance efforts. The balance of power is no longer Eurocentric. South America becomes a key battleground with global stakes. Yet the presence of resistance groups inspires hope. News of successful ambushes, sabotage, and escapes spreads rapidly. The Axis may hold territory, but they cannot fully control hearts and minds. Ordinary citizens, often overlooked in history, now shape the course of events, proving that military dominance alone cannot win a war. Life under Axis occupation transforms society in profound ways. Cities are reorganized along fascist ideals. Education becomes propaganda, teaching children loyalty to the occupiers while erasing traditional history. Media is censored. Books, newspapers, and art are strictly controlled. Daily life revolves around compliance, yet people find subtle ways to resist. Folk songs carry coded messages, families secretly teach forbidden histories, and underground schools preserve cultural knowledge. Economic consequences are severe. Industries are redirected to serve the occupiers, and shortages are common. Families struggle to obtain food, clothing, and basic necessities. Yet resilience endures. Communities band together, sharing resources and supporting resistance efforts. Small acts of defiance, graffiti, rumors, sabotage, maintain morale and remind the Axis that control is never absolute. Culturally, a dual society emerges. Publicly, citizens adhere to Axis rules. Privately, they preserve traditions, celebrate forbidden festivals, and teach younger generations the truth. Over time, this duality becomes a defining feature of South American life, shaping identity and history in ways that would endure long after the war. Decades later, this alternate history leaves South America transformed. Politically, countries are reorganized under Axis-inspired regimes, though pockets of autonomy persist. Economically, the continent is integrated into a global Axis economy, exploiting resources for the benefit of occupiers. Socially and culturally, the struggle between compliance and resistance shapes generations, leaving a legacy of resilience, courage, and defiance. The world would look radically different. Would Axis dominance have lasted, or would eventual liberation forces restore freedom? Could global conflict have ended differently if South American resources fueled the Axis war machine longer? These questions remind us that history is fragile, contingent, and endlessly fascinating. If you enjoyed exploring this alternate history, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the bell to join future explorations of what-if scenarios that challenge everything you thought you knew about history. Share your thoughts below. How do you think South America would have changed under Axis control?